That, but hey, welcome everyone. Here we are. We're live tonight. Sabbath started a few hours ago here. Probably has already started about everywhere in this country. We are at episode 225 of Line Upon Line. And I forgot my notes. But let's see here. We are looking at a vast Christmas conspiracy. This is a fresh look, a little different look at the conspiracy of what Christmas was began as, turned into, and what maybe going back to again. So if you'd like to start us out, Dr. Ricks. Oh, by the way, as you can see, we also have Kelly with us tonight. So if you can start us out, we would appreciate it.
Thank you, Ken and Kelly. This story is called It Tastes Like Fried Chicken. A forest ranger sees this guy at a campsite, and he's eating over the campfire a bald eagle. He says, "You can't eat a bald eagle." So he arrests him. The judge says to him, "Don't you realize that it's illegal to kill and eat a bald eagle? It's a federal offense." The man says, "Yes, but before you sentence me, could I explain my side of the story?" The judge says, "Go ahead and explain." The man said, "I got lost in the woods, ran out of food. I was starving to death. And I see this eagle swoop down the lake and grab a fish. And he lands on this stump near me. I'm thinking, if I throw a rock, it'll scare the eagle away and I can eat the fish. So I throw the rock hard, but somehow, my bad luck, it hits the eagle right in the head, boom, and kills him. Fish, and he slithers back in the lake." He said, "Well, what could I do? The eagle was already dead. I thought it'd be more honorable to eat him than let him lie on the ground and rot." The judge says, "Let me recess," comes back and says, "After considering it, the circumstances, we're going to let you off the hook. There'll be no charges. But I want to ask you one thing," says the judge. What do bald eagles taste like?" The man says, "Well, it's hard to explain. They're somewhere between a cross of a California condor and a spotted owl." When I read that, I said, we gotta keep that one. This one's called, I know you thought I was going to say it tastes like chicken. Anyway, this was called Speeding Juggler. Speeding Juggler. A driver was pulled over for speeding, and the policeman looked and saw some dangerous weapons in the back seat, gleaming big swords. The policeman says, "What are those dangerous weapons in the back seat?" And the man says, "They're part of my act. I juggle swords." The policeman says, "I don't believe you." He says, "Well, I'll get out of the car and I'll show you." So, "Show me." So he takes 2 swords and he's juggling it. Then 3 swords, then 4 swords, then 5 swords. He's catching a backhand behind his back. He's putting on a dazzling show. Another car comes by and he looks over and he sees these blades flashing in the air and the policeman with his lights flashing and the guy's juggling these swords. And he says, "My, what's the world coming to? That's one of the toughest sobriety tests I've ever seen." Okay, this third one, last one, won't take quite as much thought. Maybe. This one's called "I Want to Be a Pastor When I Grow Up." This little boy in the church every Sunday, and he tells one day, "I want to be a pastor." The mother's kind of proud. She says, "Well, little Johnny, I'm amazed. What made you decide you wanted to be a pastor?" He says, "Well, since I've got to go to church anyway, every Sunday, I figured it'd be a lot more fun to stand up there and yell at people than to have to listen." Is that one cutting too close to home? Some of us are.
No. Thought never entered my mind.
Well, this evening we're going to discuss a vast Christmas spiritual conspiracy, a fresh approach. In other words, is there a conspiracy to cheat us out of spiritual value we should have. That is Christmas part of the vast spiritual conspiracy. I want to start off by a story we read in the newspaper. But first, I want to mention some of the issues that we're going to look at today and next week. Next week, a little more deeply and maybe a few more answers, but we'll get a lot of it done today. The questions are, first, is Christmas a Christian holiday? Second, why was December 25th chosen as the date? Third, what significance does this date hold? Fourth, what spiritual concepts, if any, is the devil trying to obscure from our view with Xmas dates and traditions? In other words, is he obscuring anything from our view? We're going to look at that a lot today, and then even more next week as we get closer. Here's a big surprise in the newspaper article. It was online too. In 1990, Salon, a suburb of Cleveland, Ohio, school board banned all Christmas scenes, etc., from school property. Well, the enraged parents sued to get back Christmas trappings for their kids. When they went to federal court, the court concluded something remarkable. Christmas, they said, was secular. It was kept all over the world and in many religions. It was a secular worldwide holiday. That shocked them. They could, that is, the school could retain its holiday if no Bible readings or Bible quotations and no prayer was involved. No Bible, no prayer was involved. And actually, that was fine with most of the parents. The Bible portions of the Xmas have always been so overshadowed by the many other commercial traditions anyway, they thought, hey, this is fine. That was a shock. Didn't that shock you?
Yeah, that they actually did research and figured out what its origins were and what it really was, because they celebrated. I remember when I was a little kid, we went to there was about this time of year there was I don't know what you'd call it, but it was like a show from all over the world. There was displays of what they thought of Christmas, how they celebrated Christmas, everything from Japan to Germany to countries throughout all of Europe and the Middle East, and how this particular country, what they did to celebrate Christmas. And it stuck with me that I went down there and it was, wait a minute, there aren't, how many Christian Japanese are there? How many Christian, of this culture is there? But they all had a version of it.
Yeah, the winter solstice, whatever they call it, is everywhere. Far East and all kinds of places, India, and that's what was amazing. Actually, the evidence is out there, and now the world says, hey, there's nothing wrong with all this non-Christian stuff. In the past, they would have said something, but now people look at it, see, we've become enlightened.
Enlightened and foolish.
Enlightened. And what I thought was most surprising, after the parents thought about it, most of them said, hey, they don't need to have any Bible references in here or prayer or Bible stuff. We can still do quite a big Christmas up without any of it.
Right. Basically, it's returning back to its pagan roots.
Yeah.
Not that it ever had Christian in it, but from societal standpoint, which what they had turned into a Christian holiday is turning back into its pagan origins.
And they didn't mind, no quote from Luke or all those places where in the past they might have quoted from. They didn't mind. Actually, here's what most honest scholars and historians will tell you. There may be a few that don't want to admit it. December 25th, they didn't actually know for certain what was Christ's birthday, and I doubt back in the early start of the Roman Catholic Church, they even cared. They chose December 25th because it was the Roman Empire's Saturnalia, which is a winter solstice at the end of December, And it existed in many cultures, as you were saying, Ken. The Norsemen of Europe, the Egyptians. You'd be surprised. Ancient culture, I mean, to go back 1,000 and maybe even 2,000 years before Christ, had their version of the basics.
Yep. There's a History Channel about 10 or 12 years ago. I don't know how long ago. Did a great documentary on the origins of Christmas and how it got put in, how the pagan holiday was absorbed into, and we'll get into it later. But if I forget, I'll link that at the end of the show in the on the Facebook page, as long as I can remember. But I'll link that, and you can watch that. It does a great job of telling the story of how we ended up where we are.
And it's kind of some of it had to do with commercial marketing in America too. We'll mention that too. All were factors in what we have today. Also, as a good historian, Luke provides some vital information about the time period surrounding Christ's birth. If you go from Luke 1:5 to Luke 2:8, I'm going to summarize it, but because there's a lot of verses here. But Zechariah, one of the priests, and David had put all the priests in an order. They served 2 weeks in the temple, and then they went back to their local area. Now, not the high priest, but these, I call them regular priests. And then by lottery, they got to go make the offering during their period inside the holy place and some of those altar special things. And Zechariah, when he went into the temple, he saw an angel. An angel, by the way, he was like 85, something close to that. His wife was probably 75 or close to that. He never had children. He'd already prayed about it, felt bad about it. The angel said, "You're going to have a child." But because of his age, like Sarah, he didn't really believe it. The angel said, "Well, if you don't believe it, you won't be able to speak until the baby's born. The baby's to be named John." He had to write notes to tell people all that. Well, the course that he was in, the course of Abijah, and you can find that out in 1 Chronicles 24:10, the 8th course. They start in like mid-March, around Passover. So his course would have run around mid-June to the end of June, or July 1st. So that's when he would have been at the temple, got the word. And shortly, a few days thereafter, when you read the whole script, his wife Elizabeth became pregnant. It says in there that in the 6th month of her pregnancy, she met Mary. And and I guess it's a little bit of discussion, but the angel was telling Mary that she was going to be impregnated about that point with Christ. And then later they met, later, and the two fetuses jumped for joy, especially John, that the Messiah was in her cousin. Mary was Elizabeth's cousin. They're all related. The point of all that is to prove that there's 6-month age difference between the birth of Christ and the birth of John the Baptist, who was to prepare the people of Israel for Christ. It's all part of the story. By the way, none of that story is rarely ever told at Christmas time.
No, it's not. And I noticed that in that History Channel documentary, they messed up. They said there's no way you can know when Christ was born. But I think it's pretty obvious if you read the Bible and understand the scriptures the way they're written, you can get there. And once you know the calendar is 2 years off. I think Christ was born in 2 BC, or was it 3 BC? 2 BC.
I think it's 2.
And it all lines up in 2 BC with the Feast of Tabernacles.
Yep. Because remember, I'm sure I say this accurately, we're going to mention it again in part 2 as well. But if John the Baptist Mother Elizabeth got pregnant around July 1st, or the end of June, around July 1st, then he would have been born in March or April, the spring. Well, if Christ was 6 months behind him, and he was born in the spring, I don't say this right. Did I say that correctly? Then Christ would have been born in the fall. March plus 6 is September or October. The Jewish calendar kind of varies between those months in the calendar we have, but it would have been fall holy days. And there are other evidences that support that as well. And I know that the world doesn't like to look at that, but that is a fact. They taught that at Ambassador College, and but we got this from other material, not church material.
Right.
But it is in there, and Luke is a historian who tried to nail down a lot of facts. So one thing is for certain, almost every scholar I've ever heard of knows that there's no evidence Christ was born December 25th.
Well, I just want to bring up, I've had people, when you talk about the courses of the priests and you show that Christ was most likely born during the Feast of Tabernacles in the fall, you can actually work it that it comes out that Christ was conceived on December the 25th. And so then people grab that and say, oh, well, there you go. So he was conceived, and what we believe, life begins. So life began December the 25th, so we should celebrate December 25th as Christ's birth. There we go. We still are okay doing it. But one of the things I'd like to bring out is, one of the first questions you asked was, is Christmas biblical? Now, as a Christian, I mean, nowhere in the Bible do we have anything that says celebrate Christ's birth. There is no instruction to do that. Even what we come up with is, we can say pretty confidently that we know when Christ was born, but we still can't say exactly when.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that thing. But in looking at how Satan works, so you've got December the 25th is one of the biggest Christian holidays, and it celebrates Christ's birth. You have, even with looking at the way we do, the Christ was born in the fall, you can still make it to where he was conceived on December the 25th, and again celebrate his conception. But what the Bible teaches, and what I think part of what Satan hides is that what's important about Christ's life is his death. And when you're celebrating his birth and looking at that and focusing on that, you're missing the important part of his life, which was his death and why he had to die. And so I think, again, that's part of how Satan works. He gives us this thing that makes us feel all warm and fuzzy and says, here, look at this. Isn't this wonderful that we're celebrating his birth? But it kind of obscures the importance that his death, not his birth. His birth is not something we're told to celebrate. So, no, it's not biblical. It's not Christian, because God doesn't say do it. And again, I think it's just the way Satan operates things. He makes things look good, but they're not.
Let's put up our first scripture. We're going to continue the discussion that Kelly said, by the way. I want to put up that first scripture because we're again saying that he was not born December 25th, and they all pretty much know it.
All right, Luke 2:8. There were shepherds in the same country staying in the field and keeping watch by night over their flock.
Most people know this who really study it. In Jerusalem, at night, especially at night, it's worse at night, but even in the day, it's wet and cold in late December. Because of the altitude, because I actually seen this on television, it actually snows there sometimes in December and January. You do not have your livestock out, especially at night. Night's even worse than day. But at night, you do not have your livestock out. That's why the manger was empty and available for Christ, because the sheep were outside. You could have them outside in September, but not in late December. While that is not the only proof, but it is a major one that people really ought to consider.
That was one of the things that really got me questioning about the whole Christmas story that I had been taught growing up in the Baptist church, because I learned that the climate in Jerusalem is about the same as my climate where I live at. And I was like, wait a minute. So you're telling me that they have the same kind of weather that I have here, but yet in December, they're out in the fields with the sheep? And there's no way. They would freeze to death.
At night, too.
Yeah. So I said, that makes absolutely no sense. And then the more I started looking into it, of course, at the time I was looking, I had read some stuff that said that, they thought it was in the spring. And I was like, well, that makes much more sense because it's warmer. So you definitely would be out in the field with your sheep if that's when it was. But even in the fall, you're still out in the fields with your sheep because it's still not gotten real cold in the fall. So nothing about that fit for me at all, which is what made me look deeper into it to, begin to understand where Christmas came from and what it really means and its history. And it was, well, I don't have anything to do with this.
And, the barn was empty. Why would you have your barn empty in the winter? Why even have a barn? Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, I just looked up for weather for Bethlehem on December 25th. It's going to be 38 and raining this year on December 25th. That's the low for the night. Well, yeah, I'm not laying out in that field anytime soon.
There'll be no animals in that barn.
Yeah, but that's a major thing to think about. And by the way, the thing that the Bible emphasizes is Christ's death and his resurrection. Or you could put it this way, his first and second coming. Maybe the first one's the resurrection, death and resurrection. Well, birth, death, and resurrection, and then the coming. But even what we've seen is the Bible information about his coming is overshadowed. Like you never hear the story about John the Baptist. And by the way, when you read the whole story of John the Baptist, which we're not going to do right now, but when you read the more of it, it talks about how wonderful John the Baptist, when he was just being conceived as a baby, was going to be, and how wonderful he was going to be to the Messiah who he would prepare the people for. So in other words, it was sort of like, like in a movie like Star Wars, there's a lot of anticipatory promotion to promote the movie. Well, John the Baptist's birth and his parents and that whole miracle birth, sort of like Abraham, and the things the angels told people about the two of them, both John the Baptist and Jesus, were like preparatory advertising for the great things that Jesus and John the Baptist were going to do. And do you hear any of that at Christmas time?
No, he was a one-man marketing. He was one-man marketing.
Yeah. None of that is, and that would be a good story. Of course, you ought to tell it in the fall during this, that whole period from trumpets to the Feast of Tabernacles. He surely was born somewhere in that, probably first day of the Feast of Tabernacle. But wouldn't that be an appropriate time to tell that story?
Yes, it would. And that's, sometimes I think as far as, we're concerned, I think sometimes we cheat ourselves because we don't talk about that story because, again, it's tied so much to Christmas and we're so, want to stay away from that we, cheat ourselves out of a wonderful story because we don't really touch on it when he actually was born, which would be during the Feast of Tabernacles. So
I thought we might mention this next week too. The part where Elizabeth, who's a cousin to Mary, when those two women get together and they have these two great men in their bellies, whatever the medical term for that is, their womb, that's a great story that ought to be told. And what the angel said those men would do. Wouldn't that be a great story for people here?
Yes.
Right. You'll never hear that on the mainstream either, because that lets you know that the abortion would not be a good thing.
Oh, I forgot about that. Yes, because John the Baptist recognized Christ in the, say that accurately. Yes, that's true. They would never want that story told. That's true. So very true.
Doesn't fit the narrative, so we can't talk about it.
Oops.
So basically, what is clear is when the Roman Empire switched, Constantine and their committees and others, when they switched, because he thought Christianity with its popularity would help him rule the empire, and they were going to make it the official religion of the Roman Empire. Therefore, it became the Holy Roman Empire. By the way, that's a big deal, that extra title, because it comes into play much later in history as well. They made a swap. The pagans didn't want to give up the Saturnalia, so they Christianized it. Wasn't that a smart swap?
There's a term right now called cultural appropriation. It's a new thing. So if you wear a sombrero and eat a taco on Tuesday, you are participating in cultural appropriation if you're not a Mexican or whatever. It works for any any nationality. So they actually appropriated one culture to fit another. You know, they appropriated what was the Saturnalia to fit Christianity at the time.
I look at it as they compromised. You know, I mean, isn't that what we're supposed to do? Is take God's word and compromise it and change it for the better? That's what you think. I mean, to me, that's what you look at what's going on in the world, and that's what people seem to think it's okay to do that. You know, hey, it's not in the Bible, but this is a good idea. It'll put people in our seat, so let's do this. And
I suspect a little satire there.
Is that the same as playing rock music in church and then doing all the stuff they do in these mega churches to get people, whatever gets them in the door?
That's it. It's whatever gets them in the door, because once we get them in the door, then we can teach them. But the problem is you're teaching them a lie.
And
but if you study the history of Christmas, it never really took hold that way. It was always known and it was loosely associated until at one point there was very little Christian association at all with Saturnalia or Christmas, or they didn't really never stuck, you know what I mean? Until recent history, it never really stuck as one.
But that's the thing. When you have something like that and you try to compromise God's word, what happens is it begins to overpower God's word, and people start liking that because it's worldly. I mean, the compromise part is worldly. The pagan part was worldly. So you take Christianity and you put the world in it, the world is always going to take over and push Christianity out. So you have Christian people who now look at what the pagans are doing and say, hey, it'd be kind of fun to go out and get drunk every night during this time of year. So, hey, let's party. And then the other stuff that goes on, when you read the history about Saturnalia and what all went on during that time, it's actually starting to look more now with the Christmas season we have now, where people want to go out and they want to party more. It's not the same religious holiday that it used to be. And there was some, as we were talking earlier, about some research that has come out that, again, more and more Christian people are even okay with it not being a religious holiday, that it's okay just being a cultural holiday, and they're okay with that.
And the question we could ask, would God approve of using pagan customs to worship him? Let's go to the next slide, Ken, and we'll work at answering that question.
All right. Mark 7:7. But in vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men. For you set aside the commandment of God and hold tightly to the traditions of men, the washing of pitchers and cups, and you do many other such things. He said to them, full well do you reject the commandment of God, that you may keep your tradition.
And that tells me that God does not want to be worshipped using human traditions, although the traditions there had nothing to do with Christmas, but it's still the principle. He doesn't like human traditions to overshadow or contradict the true worship of the true God.
You know what? And that's what a lot of them say when you confront them. Christians, you confront them with this, and they say, well, it's tradition. They go back to the fact it's tradition. They go right back to what this verse says not to do and say, well, it's tradition, it's a feel-good thing, so that's why we do it. I heard Bill O'Reilly said that on his program one night.
I heard that too.
They had someone on there. He had someone on his program tell him straight up, there is no such Christian holiday as Christmas, it's all pagan. And he had to concede that, but then he said, well, it's tradition, and that's what we do, basically.
And probably among the Irish, it probably is years of tradition, I would assume, right?
It's the old, God says do this. Well, but this is more fun. And why would God hold that against us that we're having more fun? He's okay with that.
So, Barbara, let's look at the issue of why God does not like paganism as a method to worship him. Let's go to the next slide, Ken, please.
All right, Deuteronomy 12:30. Take heed to yourself that you do not be ensnared to follow them. After that, they are destroyed from before you, and you that not inquire after their gods, saying, how do these nations serve their gods? Even so will I do likewise. You shall not do so to Yahweh your God. For every abomination to Yahweh which he hates have they done to their gods, for even their sons and their daughters do they burn in the fire to their gods.
And these pagans traditions that the Israelites were supposed to push out and burn all their bad altars, they had abominable practices. They might seem cute, you know, a lot of things just were abominable things. But Saturnalia was known as rowdy. Let me just give you three things. We can just discuss them. Three things that the Saturnalia in Rome was known for. And I'm cleaning it up. You know, the description could be a lot more graphic. Number one, widespread intoxication and lawless behavior. Number two, sexual orgies, including going from house to house singing naked, a whole group of people singing naked. Any woman who was willing to come out on the street during those 8 days was fair game. I mean, she was saying, okay, well, put it fair game. So there was no rape or anything. No crimes against rape. That's what I mean. It was fair game. Number three, this is the one that's the most gruesome. They had very brutal human sacrifices. It eventually evolved down to each little community or neighborhood in Rome, but in other places. During the Saturnalia, they would choose whoever was someone that represented their enemy. And on the last day, they would hunt and harass the person and literally murder him in the most gruesome fashion you can think of. Now, in later centuries, when it became a Catholic thing, on the last day of Christmas, they would persecute Jews in Rome and some other major European cities. And it got pretty ugly. And they did that up until about 4 centuries ago. And I actually didn't know that. We're listening to a Jewish person going through the history. You might be shocked at how much anti-Semitism existed during the Dark Ages and all that too many centuries ago. I think even the good Pope John Paul II, I believe this is true, he apologized for Catholic excesses, which included persecution of Jews and a few other things, which I think was a good thing for him to do. And the last day of Christmas was the date for human sacrifice during the Saturnalia. Some of that came over for a while into Christianity.
Yeah. I was doing a little bit of research this evening and found an article on the winter solstice in the Telegraph for the UK. And this kind of jumped out at me, talking about some of the things that went on during Saturnalia or during the winter solstice celebration. It was traditional to offer gifts of imitation fruit, which was a symbol of fertility, dolls, which were symbolic of the custom of human sacrifice, and candles, which were reminiscent of the bonfires traditionally associated with pagan solstice celebrations. And it goes on to say that they would even interrupt wars and postpone them in order for those people to come and party during this time.
That's how we won one of the major battle during the Revolutionary War. The Germans got drunk on Christmas, and Washington went in there and cleaned house.
Yeah. But I just found it interesting that talking about the gifts and things that, again, that's what the tradition was during this time, was to give these gifts, which had meaning for them with the worship of their gods. But, it's a gift.
By the way, I might just elaborate on 2 things you said. One that Kelly was saying about gifts. We'll probably bring this up later. The gifts under the Christmas tree, that's part of pagan tree worship. George Washington thing, because it's real quickly. By the way, when the Protestant Reformation came along, they realized that Christmas was too rowdy and too pagan. For instance, it happened in other European countries, but the biggest one was in England. In England, Christmas during the 1600s and for a good while was outlawed by the Puritans who came to power in England, and that's a big story. By the way, when Charles Dickens wrote his book, The Christmas Carol, he was fighting against the Puritan influence which said Christmas was too pagan and too rowdy, too much drunken orgy. And the whole theme of the book is, if you don't like Christmas, you're a Scrooge. Who wants to be a Scrooge? and ultimately, Charles Dickens and his pro-Christmas supporters eventually won out. But the Puritans in America had outlawed Christmas for quite a while. And that's why what Ken said about the Battle of Trenton, George Washington, the colonialists, didn't keep Christmas, and he knew that the Hessian troops would be drunk or
they were mercenaries.
Yeah.
Mercenaries, yeah.
And you could argue that if they hadn't won that battle, since they had lost every other battle, they maybe couldn't continue the war. But after that victory, they got thousands more volunteers and a lot more supplies and support. So not keeping Christmas may have saved America.
Yeah.
And actually, according to studies, it wasn't until after the Civil War until merchants saw the value, we can mention this later, the value of Christmas shopping, the Christmas and more Catholic, but started seeing the value of Christmas. And then it sort of to just more or less take over every decade. It got stronger and stronger. It was driven by money.
Yeah, well,
like that, and not doctrine.
Right. That History Channel documentary, they explained it as a way to unite the country because I don't know, after the Civil War, as a way to unite the country, they kind of used Christmas as a way to do that. And if you look back, all these Christmas traditions are phony. They started in books and in songs and in poems. They didn't exist before that. Charles Dickens, like you mentioned, "'Twas the Night Before Christmas," that poem, that was all that stuff before those things were written didn't exist. It was fiction. Those were all fiction. Those got into the American cultural psyche, and it was sold, marketed to everybody as this wonderful thing, and they bought it. Just like the Coca-Cola Santa Claus. Before they redrew Santa Claus, he was a skinny, drunken, dirty, nasty image, like Loki or something.
And he would get kids if they were bad. He would beat them if they were bad, right?
Yeah. They twisted that around to be naughty and nice stuff, and you're on a list and you get a present. It was very hideous otherwise before that was all invented.
By the way, I've got this written that Hadan Sundblom was the illustrator for a magazine that was hired to promote Coca-Cola. Now, the Coca-Cola trademark had red in it, and obviously marketing is for positive design, etc. This is 1931. Coca-Cola had to take cocaine out of the recipe, and it had been declining. They had replaced it with caffeine, but it's not the same. But this promotion campaign with the Santa Claus, a red suit, and a jolly, smiling, rosy cheek was a huge success. And it's hard to believe when you tell somebody our current modern image of Santa Claus comes from marketing, promotion by a major American company.
Yep. All these images that we have are romanticization of a pagan images that were converted, used by authors, used by poets, used by songwriters to create a false image in everybody's mind. And it's been accepted as fact now, basically even mind control, what do you call it? Just to create this false image. It's hard to get out of it. I mean, once you get into the church and you have decided, okay, this is a fact, this is pagan, the Bible is the truth, it's difficult to get out of it, especially with the people around you. They just won't let go of it.
But it makes you feel warm and fuzzy, so doesn't that make it okay?
But no. What makes it okay is it's for the children. Everything's
Exactly.
okay as long as it's for the children.
Yeah.
Did you mention the poem "The Night Before Christmas"? Ken,
Yeah.
that was a famous one. Also, get my dates right. In 1949, Johnny Marks wrote the song "Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer." Would you believe that song and the reindeer, is part of another poem that came like a century before, really took off and shaped our image of Christmas?
Yep. All this stuff is made up. It's all faux. It's all fake.
It also shows you the power, and I guess now, of course, we have the internet instead, but it shows you the power that literature, Charles Dickens' book, Coca-Cola advertising, and all these other major department stores. It shows you the power of promotion, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but before all this Protestant influence, in fact, the Night Before Christmas was written by what was he? Not a Methodist. What was he? What was that religion that Mitt Romney is? What is that?
Mormon. Oh yeah,
I think he was a Mormon minister wrote. I think he was Mormon. He was wrote, right, and he wouldn't affix his name to it. He was afraid he'd get in trouble, so he didn't affix his name to it. But that's who wrote "'Twas the Night Before Christmas." There is no Christ in that poem.
By the way, he's the one that first made a big deal of the reindeers. I've got it written down: Blitzer, Comet, Dancer, Dasher. Anyway, Prancer, Vixen. It doesn't matter. And Comet. Did I leave Comet out? My wife said. My wife ran through the list. I didn't get them all in order, but anyway.
Blitzen, man.
Blitzen. I may have left them out. All that came out of poetry and literature, but it's taken its facts. And of course, originally Saint Nick was in the Middle East and in the North Country, and now he's been moved to the North Pole because of the poem. Isn't that wonderful?
Right, and they borrowed the character of Saint Nicholas, the character of what was Santa Claus? What was it before? There was another name.
Kris Kringle.
Claus,
Kris Kringle,
which is a kind of a vile, almost one of them was almost like a vile satanic image, and they softened it up and they marketed it and repackaged it and borrowed this from this culture and this from this culture, all pagan, and sold it to the American people and the world, and it worked. And they do it. Billions of people go for it every year.
Let me ask you the question: If I'm asking this, if you were, say, a pastor of a nominal Christian church, and you said, "I'm going to put the Bible and Christ back into Christmas," do you realize that you would have an uphill struggle? Because even the things in the Bible that you could talk about, like Mary and Joseph and Elizabeth and Zechariah and John the Baptist, nobody cares about that. All they're interested in is Santa Claus.
Yeah.
All they're interested in is, what am I getting?
Yep. Yep. If you think about Christmas, some of the old songs about Christmas, one of them was about murder. If you don't give us what we want, it was almost like Halloween. People would go into the rich people's houses and take what they want. And one of the songs is, if you don't give us what we want, we're going to kill you or kill your servant or whatever. Something will come down, bowl and all. I forget what the name of the song was, but that's what Christmas was before they romanticized it and marketed it and switched it around to get the desired effect out of it.
Well, Halloween is actually tied to Christmas.
Yeah, yeah. It's all pagan. It's all pagan.
As far as most retailers go, the day after Halloween, because they push Halloween too, the day after Halloween, they start a feverish Christmas shopping push. I realize Thanksgiving's in the middle, but they don't let it slow them down too much.
No.
Just a reason for Black Friday, right?
Exactly. Which Black Friday is about what? Oh, yeah. Retail sales.
They got Black Friday. They got, what's the Monday called?
Cyber Monday.
Cyber Monday, and they got all kinds of new stuff now I never heard of. Besides the shop at a small shop on Saturday, and this on
Main Street.
This week
Main
was
Street
like
Saturday. Main Street
this
Saturday.
Week, this week they had something called Green Monday. I have no idea what that is. What's Green Monday? They got
another excuse to spend your money.
They just keep adding ways. It's like every day you can look. Today there's the National Cupcake Day, Cookie Day. I mean, their stuff is just off the charts on what every day's got to mean something or have a day attributed to it nowadays.
But by the way, Saint Nicholas, as I said, came from the Roman Empire, obviously from the Middle East. Originally Saint Nick's, and then he got a day, and they moved it to December, and then they lined it up to bring in some of his followers to the Saint Nick's cult into Christmas. It was moved from December 6th to December 25th. And it's a nice long story. Won't go into details. But before we look at Saint Nick, I wanted to mention something, and I read this. I'm assuming it's accurate. Retailers make 60% of their profits from that period after Halloween to Christmas. It's like they have put themselves into a trap. If they don't generate a lot of, sales volume during that period, they might go bankrupt. They really do.
Yeah, so, there's a lot of people put a lot of things on Black Friday. They look at that, and if it doesn't go well for them, then you start hearing about how terrible everything is, and people start panicking.
And they're going to close stores. Now, I did hear that Black Friday was reasonably good, probably because of the Trump effect on consumer confidence, stock market. And if that is true, probably stores will do reasonable on Christmas. But there are rumors that some are going out of business, some of the great ones like Sears, because, well, many different reasons, I guess. But I like to look at it. Retailers put themselves into a trap. They promoted, 1870s, 1880s. They really pushed hard because they saw the value in Christmas sales. Many of them didn't even believe in the religious meaning of it. It was just money, money, money. But it's gotten so now, for whatever reason, if they don't make a big turnover, in November and December, they may go bankrupt. They're caught in the trap.
Well, what you just said there made me think about something that just kind of hit me with that. When you look at God's holy days, it's about God and his people and the things that it symbolizes. When you look at the secular Christian holidays, Halloween, sales of candy, Christmas, sales of everything. Easter now is becoming a big sale day for spring fashions and things. And so it's all about, all these holidays are about making money.
Yes. And speaking of the Saint Nick cult, here's a scripture. Put the next one. This is one that's a bit scary, that maybe this Saint Nick's cult has been warned about by Christ.
But I have a few things against you, because there are some who hold the teaching of Balaam, who taught Balak to throw a stumbling block before the children of Israel, to eat things sacrificed to idols, and to commit sexual immorality. So you also have. Let me
interrupt you for a second, just a quick second. If you read the story of Balaam, he did what he did because the king offered him tons of money to curse Israel. Well, he couldn't curse Israel because God wouldn't allow it. But he said, pay me the money and I'll teach you how to get Israel to curse itself. He did it for money. And don't you see a similarity between greed and money? Mm-hmm. Go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Ken. I just wanted to throw that out there.
15. So you also have some who hold to the teaching of the Nicolaitans, which I hate.
And you look at the doctrines of the Nicolaitans, and it's similar to Saturnalia. Greed, sexual orgy, it's pagan. It's kind of like putting something in front of the worship of the true God. There were people trying to infiltrate the true church of God at that time. And at least that warning for that particular congregation was, you're permitting some of this stuff to go on.
Yeah, this battle between paganism and Christianity or God has been going on for millennia. This is nothing new. It's just how it's changed in our lifetime, how it's gotten to where it is. 150 years ago, the concept of Christmas was absolutely nothing like what we see today. It is nothing at all like it. It was shunned by most of the country, and only the newer people coming over from Europe brought it with them, from Germany and England and other countries like that. But not everybody was in for the Christmas. It wasn't a big national unifying like now, and it's only in recent history that it's gotten that way.
And when America was like 98%,
all these wonderful long-running traditions, all these wonderful long-running traditions that people think go back hundreds of years. Sorry, it's not the case.
When America was like 98% Protestant, only a small number of people kept Christmas. As they got all the, and I mean this respectfully, I'm not running them down, all the people from Germany and the Irish Catholics who were more Christmas oriented, that started to change things. And then the stores saw the money in it, and well, I guess the rest is history.
Wasn't there a section of the country that in recent history tried to outlaw it, like in the 40s or this something tells me somewhere in the 20th century, some portion of somewhere in this country tried to outlaw it, and it didn't hold.
I think it was New England, places in New England.
Could have been.
Because they had laws that had been on the books for years, and they tried to enforce them. But I'm really not sure. Wow. The truth is, America is just too money oriented. If there's money in it, nobody really cares anymore.
Yep.
Let's read our last scripture. Then I want to discuss some world effects, and then we'll come back to some more interesting things next weekend.
All right, here's the big one that we all usually go to when we talk about Christmas not being something we should celebrate. Jeremiah 10:4, they deck it with silver and with gold. They fasten it with nails and with hammers, that it not move. They are like a palm tree of turned work and don't speak. They must be carried because they can't go. Don't be afraid of them, for they can't do evil. Neither is it in them to do good.
From what I've read, the pagans who did worship trees, and some were in Northern Europe, they had these big, giant pine trees. At least the ancient culture came that the tree was a source of goodness, and so gifts would be under the tree to represent the tree as a source of goodness. I realized that people say, well, but we've changed all that to Christmas. It's not the same. But would God like it? That's the thing I would ask.
Well, what I would ask is, who gave us the authority to change it? Where did we get the authority to say, oh, we don't like what this is, we're going to do it our way? That's what got Israel into trouble all the time throughout history. Ignoring what God told them to do, they go their way, and then someone would come and invade them for a few years, and then they'd have to start all over again.
Well, see, we're humankind, so that gives us the right to change everything that God said, because we are humankind.
Right. And that's how the Catholics, and it started back with the Council of Nicaea. I mean, that's where they started this particular thing we're talking about. But yeah, exactly.
One more.
No, I was just going to say that I was just thinking about talking about putting Christ back in Christmas and stuff, and it's, again, you look at God's holy days, and it's nothing but filled with God. So you can't take God out of the holy days, because it's all about Him. And Christmas, talking about putting Christ in it, it has nothing to do with the Bible whatsoever.
Yeah. I was saying, like, the pastor who wanted to put Christ back in Christmas, he's got to fight the impulse toward shopping, tree decoration, lights, mistletoe, gift giving, cards, and a whole bunch of other stuff. Which is
right. And even the things that they have put Christ in symbolically into Christmas are all wrong. There's no indication there was three wise men. They didn't show up when he was a baby in a manger in Bethlehem. They weren't poor just because there wasn't any rooms left in the hotel at the time. All these pieces and bits they put in there are all wrong. None of that's in the Bible the way they portray it. I think that's more closely attuned to certain pagan traditions, Semiramis or whatever, and the true origin came Christmas and Centralia.
That's the one thing. I mean, anytime you go looking into the history, I mean, it's out there. The information's there. You know, you don't have to listen to what we're saying. You can do a search on the internet, and there's all kinds of articles that come up that tell you the history of Christmas and where it came from, and every one of them will agree it comes from paganism. So the question is, does God accept paganism as a form of worship for him? And I think, you know,
by the way, something and I saw in our newspaper here that I thought was interesting. The Islamic Arab League met, I think it's 57 nations, to complain about America moving the embassy to Jerusalem. And I'll just summarize the article. It started off with some recommendations for some really harsh penalties for America, but it ended by saying they really took a very mild one. In other words, the mild one was they want America to instead recognize Jerusalem as the capital of the PLO. That's all. It wasn't all those other more harsh things they didn't do. And even the PLO's demonstrations, while they're, you know, violent and messy, it wasn't all that bad. I almost say it's a moderate win for America. Now, I realize next week could be worse, and I could be wrong and get worse and worse. But I've seen them throw this kind of hissy fit riots over minor stuff like a rumor somebody walked up on the holy mountain or some UN vote they didn't like. I mean, PLO having riots on the street is almost not commonplace, but they do it, what, 10, 15 times a year?
Yeah.
I have not seen anything in the Arab world that's overwhelmingly shocking yet. Now, I realize next week could be different, but it looks like America came out of this with, I call anything that isn't too bad a win.
Well, he broke the symmetry of, you know, as long as they kept everybody apart, the Palestinians were winning. As long as they kept everything at a boil, they were winning. But now, all of a sudden, our country's ignoring what their wishes are. They're not winning. He broke that. Now they're like, all of a sudden they're losing instead of holding a symmetry or an even keel. Now they got to do something about it. They can't see themselves as losing.
And throwing a hissy fit, I'll put my opinion. I seriously doubt that's going to influence Donald Trump, or at least the level of hissy fit they're throwing so far is not that big a deal. And the Arab world, I think this is true. I guess no one knows certain. The Arab world as a whole, like Saudi Arabia, they're more concerned with Iran and the proxy war on their border with Iran than they are the PLO's demands. I mean, surely they want Jerusalem to be a Islamic city. Don't get me wrong. They don't like the Jewish nation there, but I think they're more concerned with Iran, and they need America's help, or they might. So I don't think they're going to make that big a fuss.
I mean, from what I understand, previous presidents have all said that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. They just haven't made it official.
They wouldn't do anything.
And every one of them promised they would.
Yes, and Trump stepped up and he did what was promised. And so the whole thing was, from what I understand, again, it was they said that, but they wanted to use it as a tool to negotiate peace by kind of dangling out there that maybe, you know, we might be able to do something with Jerusalem. But I mean, it hasn't ever worked. I mean, they're dealing with people trying to negotiate points that the people don't care about. They only care about one thing: get rid of Israel.
Yeah, I actually think at a lasting peace treaty, I understand that, but they have a better chance of getting a temporary peace treaty by not giving in to everything the PLO wants. See, in the past, by the way, they act like, well, we've had peace negotiations until this. They haven't. The PLO has refused to talk to Israel about a peace negotiation for years, because I watched that sort of thing. They haven't. They say, we don't need to. The UN is going to recognize us as a nation, whether Israel cooperates or not. The UN's going to do this. Everybody's going to do it for them. We don't have to talk to you Jews. Well, now with Trump in there, at least Trump indicates he's going to be pro-Jewish. Therefore, and the UN can't really do anything. I mean, they can't make Israel do anything. They certainly can't make America do anything. So in effect, and I know the UN's anti-Semitic, but in effect, they're going to have, if they want anything, they're going to have to come to America and Israel and negotiate. It might take them a while for them to realize it. I think I'm right. What do you think, Ken?
I think you're right. I do. I agree.
I think from a negotiation standpoint, if all of a sudden I'm losing things that were never threatened before, I may be a little more willing to negotiate to keep anything else from happening.
Exactly.
Like the third temple.
No, you're right.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I don't think that's on the menu right away, but other things.
Oh, you know what?
Also,
though?
we might
if they,
yes.
You know what? Just thinking, if they proposed it, don't you think Trump would back it?
I think he would throw some support out there, or at least give the appearance of it, which again would scare the other people. Like, hey, we need to cut a deal. We need to cut a deal now. Stop this.
Right. Not only that, he's a builder.
Yeah,
that's true. He is a builder. He might tell them a way they can build it. By the way, you know that scripture in Revelation 11, how the courtyard of the third temple is in the hands of the Gentiles? Theoretically, if you did it well, you could build a temple and leave the Dome of the Rock there. I'm not saying that's ideal, but that could happen, and that would fit Revelation 11.
Right. And there's also, I've heard a lot of people theorize that the Dome of the Rock isn't the actual location of the temple. So maybe they build it where they think the temple was. Maybe they discover something. Who knows? I don't know.
Or even if they build a couple hundred yards further up the mountain, even still, it would fulfill Bible prophecy. That's the point. Regardless, if you argue about exactly where the Dome of the Rock shouldn't be or shouldn't be, I think it would fulfill Bible prophecy.
Yep.
And well, at any rate, I hope people come back next week. We have a lot more interesting things to say about Christmas that maybe you haven't heard before, or will be interesting. And by the way, if you all disagree with what we're saying, feel free to email Ken.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah,
I'm a little upset because I was getting ready to say the same thing.
Yeah, I'll forward them right on over to you. Oh, that's all right. Go ahead and email me. Line upon line 2810@gmail.com. I don't mind. I have no mind picking out the scriptures and nobody will. I mean, I'll share it with everybody. All of us have no problem doing that. We've been proving it and have proved it to ourselves many times, many years ago. So we're ready for that. So, are we done? Do you have anything else
By the way,
to announce?
Before we close, make one statement. We said this last year, but I want to say it again. Even though we recognize the Christian roots are not biblical, I'm not against Christians keep Christmas because they believe in Christ. In other words, Christians have a right to be wrong. And those people who are secular in America that want to shut them down because they dare use the word of Christ, I sort of have that feeling that I want to let Christians know we know they misunderstand. They've inherited all this. And I don't have anything against people who want to put Christ of America's consciousness. In other words, they have a right to be wrong, and the atheists shouldn't be able to shut them down. Also, pray for Anthony Wilson overcoming some cancer And Robert Gooch, who's, I believe it's Terry, who's a major church member in our church. It's Terry Gooch's brother, Robert. He went to the hospital for appendicitis, got pneumonia, and is in a lot of medical trouble, a lot of pain. It may be age related, but that doesn't make it any less problematic.
No, absolutely not. Well, if that's it, I guess we've come to the end of episode 225. We want to thank everyone for viewing with or watching us, and we may have some new viewers. We want to thank you for checking in with us as well. If you want to ever give us feedback, like I said, lineuponline2810@gmail.com, or you can just go to our Facebook page and leave something there. And we thank everyone, and we hope to see you all here again next week for part 2. Until then, good night and may God bless.
We're happy you could make it, and so glad you are here, and hope that we've been able to make God's word more clear. Until next time, may God be with you in everything you try. But for now, till next week, we have to say goodbye.